My name is Jay Kumar. I'm a cloud solution architect in this DC area. So I specialize on app and infrastructure side of the Azure cloud. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk about cloud adoption framework and also some of the governance models while you're operating in the cloud. So without further ado, let's get started. So first thing, all right, so before I just jump into this topic of cloud adoption, I'm going to talk a little bit about digital transformation. So why we are doing cloud adoption and things like that. So digital transformation is actually everywhere. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about the premise of cloud adoption framework, and then we will take it over to the cloud adoption framework as well. So you all know that technology is omnipresent and it is changing the way we do business, and it is cutting into innovation, growth, and all that for customers and the organizations. The importance of digital transformation is urgent since the year 2000. And I believe that around 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have gone out of business due to digital disruption. So we see companies responding to this by creating digital strategies across four core areas, basically engaging their customers, empowering their employees, optimizing their solutions, and providing better customer experience like that. So everyone is aware how important this is. You might have heard about Uber, obviously, and how it has come up and disturbed or made some sort of a disruption in an industry that has been traditionally well secured, and there were no competitors for that. And so with a simple application, they are able to disrupt a whole industry as well. So this is imminent, and this is actually changing the way we do things. So the key business drivers of digital transformation are modernization, transformation, growth, and business returns. So let's jump a little bit further into that. So cloud platforms are growing and evolving at tremendous pace, and with market-driven demand, starting from lift and shift operations into more modernization and innovation type scenarios, is actually changing the way we do IT. So we all know that going to cloud, it's going to help you to reduce your administrative costs, and also making sure that you have the faster time to market, and will also provide another rich experience. Like one of the benefits of going to cloud is you can use native cloud analytics and data driven tools that gives a rich experience for the customers. So pretty much from a boring website, it goes to a very good analytical and a feature driven data experience. So this is all the drivers. Like people are like doing these kind of things now, and if you are not doing or doing business in the traditional fashion, it's not going to scale and it's not going to satisfy your customers. So that's one of the drivers for cloud adoption as well. So just to recap, there are challenges, but moving from traditional on-premises to cloud is also not so simple. We may think that you can just take it and then put it in the cloud. And so there are different elements of this. Basically, it is a culture shift. It actually impacts people, culture, technology, and every aspects of your organization. So the goal of the cloud adoption framework is to make this change as smooth as possible. The cloud adoption framework provides an established blueprint to drive this change in your organization, and we will provide you time-tested practices. And we will discuss some of these in the upcoming slides. So to recap, the cloud computing is a new normal. It changes fundamentally how enterprises procure and use technology and resources, and technology is ever present through the cloud, and companies are moving to this model rapidly. So capitalizing on this shift is essential for your growth and for innovation as well. So now let's enter cloud adoption framework. So please make a note of that URL there, the vanity URL that we have, aka.ms/adopt. So this is one quick URL that you can use to navigate through the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework if you want to have a reference. Some little bit of history around Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So in July 2018, we actually released something called a Cloud Operating Model, or COM. The cloud operating model was a guide that helped customers to do how to do a cloud adoption. It was more technology centric, and it was not the full blown, or it is not all inclusive type of of a framework, where it did not address some of those nuances around the frictions that happen when you go into the cloud. So by October 2018, we began to take stock of all the models which have proliferated around the customer organizations, and then we gather a lot of information, and we put together this cloud adoption framework, which actually is a marriage of people, processes, and technologies. So the goal is to have and achieve a balance, how you are going to cloud, a balance of all these three elements, to make sure that none of them is like a three-legged stool, if you would say. None of them is not clearly thought of. Like, so we want to make sure that we have a balanced process for an adoption. That's all about Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So now let's talk about the whole framework itself. So there are two aspects of this framework we will talk about. The first part of it is called transformation, which is obviously we talk about digital transformation. So it is in that swim lane, you see there, it is a series of steps or phases that we will do for the transformation phase of the cloud adoption framework. And in the operate model, there is after the fact, once you have migrated to cloud, or even while you are migrating to cloud, you will think about these things. But in practice, you will do this operationalization of the cloud once you are putting your assets in the cloud. So two elements of that are governance and management. So we'll talk about some of these things in detail again. So looking at the transformational phase, first of all, we start with a strategy. So a strategy defines a business justification and expected outcomes, right? So basically it is about understanding your motivations. Why are you going to cloud? What is the motivation? Is it because you wanted to have a data center exit, or you wanted to have something like an innovation or a product re-engineering, or some capabilities that the cloud provides to you? So such things are the strategies. So basically you take these strategies, you put business outcomes based on these strategies, and provide business justifications for those strategies. And now after that, we just go for a planning phase. In the planning phase, you align the business outcomes into actionable technology backlogs. Basically, you specifically understanding your current state of your digital assets, and then identifying workloads to move or create into the cloud, and creating cloud adoption plan based on the current digital real estate. So once this planning is done, you go to a ready state. A ready state is a preparation state. Like basically you are preparing your people, culture, and environment. So there are aspects like you wanted to prepare skill sets, you want to prepare the whole organization to what is coming in the next level. So that's kind of the readiness factor. So basically you may also provide a starting point, like identify a POC project, or something that is characteristics of all that you're trying to do here. So basically a small project, but it is also encompassing all the required elements of what you're trying to do here. So, and after that, you go for the adopt phase. The adopt can fork into two steps. One of them is called the migration phase or migration process, where it is you actually lift and shift as it is into cloud. Basically, you are thinking about more like a no change movement. Basically, you are thinking about for example, you want to exit out of your data center. So in that scenario, you may think about a migration. And the second fork of that is innovation. Basically, you wanted to refactor or re-engineer some of your code, your products, and then you do something like an innovation track. So you could do it in two different ways. Once that is done, then you will do an operate phase, where it is governance and management. So we will talk a little bit more about in the upcoming slides. So now let's talk about strategy. So there are, in the slide, if you can read those through, there are several motivations that we usually identify. Some of them is executive mandate. It could be something like a data center exit or cost savings, and technical capabilities, basically some of those capabilities that are not available on premises. So again, market demands, all sorts of things like that happen. So those are the motivations. Like you basically take those motivations and then you put those things together and then define the outcomes. Basically, you have a motivation, you want to have what is the outcome of that motivation, right? So basically, it just could be something like a financial outcome, or it could be a customer engagement outcome, or a performance outcome. Basically, your application is not performing enough in your on premises. So we want to make sure those things are addressed. So those are the outcomes. And then we have a business justification. Basically, this is almost like a project planning phase, right? Basically, you are thinking about what is the total cost of ownership, how much the financial model is going to look like, and or is everybody okay with this change, and things like that. So basically, you put a business justification for your outcomes. Basically, this is tying all these things together, and then you identify a first project that actually has all the characteristics of what you have defined so far. Basically, it is simple enough, but also has all the properties of what you wanted to solve. So basically, it has the business criteria, business technical criteria, and a qualitative analysis of what you're trying to achieve here. So that's all about strategy. Now let's look at the planning phase. So the first thing in the planning is you define your digital real estate. So basically, you rationalize your real estate, and then there are different tools that we provide for those things. Like, for example, Microsoft Azure Migrate is a tool that you could use. You could actually build that inventory, and then you look at what you want to do with that. So there could be a qualitative analysis or a quantitative analysis, how much stuff you have, and make decisions based on that. And a qualitative analysis is that how much of changes, like how do you want to transform that. So more like the first one is more around migration versus innovation type thing. So basically, just analyze your footprint based on all these things. And now once that is done, then you have an initial organization alignment. In this part of this in this step, you usually do is you organize a cloud strategy team. Basically, these are the guys who look at the digital real estate, create a roadmap, and do all sorts of things like that. Actually makes sense to do this whole adoption process. And then there is also this a pillar around skills readiness. Basically, you want to make sure that the organization has the right skills. If not, we are actually training the people. And also we have the thought process around change management and all that kind of things. And that actually is the third pillar of this planning phase. And obviously, after that, you come up with this cloud adoption plan end to end. So this could be a 5R strategy, which actually starts thinks about rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, or replace. These are all kinds of the strategies that we usually talk about. Rehost is almost same as plain migration. It's a lift and shift operation. Refactor, re-architect, rebuild, or replace are sorts of innovation track. Basically, in the refactor, we usually think about replacing IaaS services with PaaS services, just like not a major change in the application architecture, but the hosting may change, the deployment model may change. That's called the refactoring. And the re-architecting is a little bit more deep. What we do is we actually think about the components of the application and re-architect them. So basically, we are going to use new tools, new technologies. Maybe we'll just kind of wrap around some of the new stuff that we have. Rebuild is totally like start from the scratch. You just throw away what you have. Replace maybe is like another solution. For example, you may replace one of your homegrown applications with a SaaS product or something like that. So this is called the rationalization approach. Once you have the digital real estate and you have a strategy team, we just go through this and do a rationalization exercise and then map out what you want to do with your whole footprint. And this also involves some sort of like a dependency map. Sometimes one of the applications may be dependent on others, so we may have to think about all those kind of maps as well. So next thing is ready. So once we have done your planning phase, this is all about ensuring that the environment is prepared for readiness. So you sketch your playground, create an organization hierarchy and a subscription management. This is all about you are entering the cloud arena. So now you wanted to have a set of like a landing zone, we would say that. Like basically you want to prepare the subscriptions, the organizational structure, the way we want to do things in cloud. This also talks about a first project. So basically we create a landing zone infrastructure, a landing zone ID, and identity and access management, a landing zone for costs and billing, and also the blueprints. Basically we create all sorts of blueprints for continued growth in the cloud. So this is all about like preparing the ground, making sure that we are going to build on top of that. Now let's talk about the migrate part, so the adoption path. I mentioned that in the adoption phase, we always have the migrate or innovate tracks. In the migrate phase, we actually assess what you have, rehost, optimize, and then manage those. It's pretty simple. Pretty much what you do, you actually look at your footprint. Maybe you look at your the parameters around performance and all that. Maybe you right size it. Basically, sometimes it happens that you may be running a beefy machine for no reason. So you could actually do some sort of optimizations there. You could do, so there is a bunch of telemetry that we collect, and we actually do analysis on top of that. And what we do is once that that analysis is there, we can actually map from on-premises to Azure resources. So that's the rehosting, and then you optimize it. It's sometimes you may not be still having the optimized environment, but you still constantly look on it. You have Azure Monitor and things like that, which we actually overlay on top of this, and then constantly optimize. That's the beauty of the cloud, is that you can always go up and down based on demand. So that's a migrate path. Now let's talk about innovation. In the innovation phase, you could, as I mentioned before, you could refactor, you re-architect, or rebuild. Replace is just maybe another solution, which is, for example, if you have, if you wanted to replace something with SharePoint, then it is it's kind of replace, which is not in Azure as well. You could use SharePoint online services. You could build a SharePoint as a IaaS solution in Azure, but usually people go by SaaS products. So anyway, so the innovation, you abstract your environment. Basically, you conceptualize it and then try to make how do you change that from the current design to a new design, which could be a refactor. Refactor is always like a rehosting. It's not a rehosting. It is more like a different deployment model. For example, like you could use something like a serverless model. You could use Kubernetes, things like that, to host some of those things. Re-architect is always like splitting the app, and then maybe you just go from a monolith to a microservices, right? Those are the re-architecting scenarios. Rebuild is just
intensity. We're going to get even better at customer insights and Power Apps. We're really going to show customers what's possible. And then I'm really excited about the proactive services opportunity.
Sorry, I'm hearing something in the background.
Engineers and the customer success account managers in that journey. So
I tell you what, if it could have been, okay, I think that's all set. There was another panelist who had some noise in the background, but that's now muted.
All right, thank you. So how am I doing with the time?
Oh, we've got another 15 minutes, no problem.
Cool. Yeah, so now let's talk about, I think you're all clear about the innovation phase. So basically it is, it's an analysis that you do, and then you come up with an approach that actually fits your model, right? So now let's talk about the governance. This is the second, once you are actually comfortable with the cloud, you have lots of assets in the cloud. You may be thinking about governance in the beginning itself, but then this is more coming into the foreground when you have assets in the cloud. You're pretty much trying to manage and operationalize your cloud. So basically, if you look at this diagram, you have two swim lanes. On the top, you have corporate policies. Why do we do governance? Governance is actually driven by corporate policies. Basically, you are a compliance a policy that you need to be compliant with, and it could be sort of processes that you need to adhere to. So basically, you are having a set of items that we wanted to cater to. So, and in the bottom layer of this diagram, you have the 5 pillars of cloud discipline, which are like, how do we address all these corporate priorities? And there are aspects like cost management, which could be a business risk, and then it could be security baseline, also maybe business risks. There could be some sort of compliance related aspects to that. And then you want to have a resource consistency. Basically, you want to make sure that you have for efficiency and ease of usage, you want to make sure that you have a consistent model for deploying, right? We don't want everybody having their own whims and fancies when they are trying to implement something in the cloud. It has to be standardized. So we need to have some resource consistencies and identity baseline. So we all know that when we are operating in the cloud, the traditional model of security is always around layered security in terms of like physical security. Then you have the application security and all sorts of things. But that's all important in cloud. But then when we come to cloud, we actually start off with the identity. So basically, the cloud is a different place, and then we are actually thinking identity at the center of security. Basically, there are lots of assets in Azure in cloud, and we want to make sure that the access control is the first point where we need to make sure that we have a single identity and we have visibility into what all the things that the user has access to. So we actually start from this identity and walk outwards, and then make all those choices around layered security as well. So now, again, deployment acceleration is also about DevOps and things like that. How do you want to do control as well as speed? There is always conflicting priorities here, so we actually do some sort of acceleration, and these are all part of the governance model. Now let's think about the manage and operations. So in the management, some of the considerations in the management are the business alignment, and how do you define criticality of your processes, the understand the business impact and how critical, like you all know that when the standard the IT management processes, like, how much critical are these applications, what is your business continuity plan and things like that. So basically, you want to have all those management aspects, and then we want to have an operational model where we want to have monitoring of your assets, making sure that you are continuously monitoring and making sure your software is running smooth. And then we also want to have the resiliency. And when there is more load and more demand on your system, we wanted to make sure that we are not shutting down the environment by having a lot of users there. We want to also have the cost management aspects of it as well, right? When there is less number of users, we want to make sure that we scale down. So one of the advantages of cloud is the economies of scale, right? Basically, you have assets running in the cloud which could be used up and down, and it is not a static asset like you have in the on-premises environment. So these are some of the management and operations aspects of the cloud that we actually put into the governance model. So I think to recap this, I think we saw multiple steps here in terms of the cloud adoption framework. First of all, we define a strategy, and then we go into the planning and make the environment or the organization ready for this change, and then do the adoption. Right, that's pretty simple. Like, four major steps, and then in the adoption, you could be doing migration or innovation, and obviously we will be continuously doing governance and management. That's the two lines going two directions, which means that it is a continuous process. The first one is basically your transformational process. Now let's talk about a little bit on governance. All right. So there are major drivers for IT governance. What pretty much is all about risk. Governance is all about risk. Actually, you wanted to keep risk at bay, and we wanted to maintain availability to systems and services all the time, and consistently apply policies and compliances, and also protect customer data. So these are all the drivers of governance. So we wanted to have a good governance model for our cloud as well. Now let's think about the modern IT shop, where everybody is working in the agile philosophy here, and we have cloud and agile. Both are like fast-paced environments. We wanted to have more choices and speed for your developers, but at the same time, you also want to have control and stability to your organization. So these two are two competing objectives. And so the value of having a governance model is to make sure that we address these two aspects of the organization and make sure that we have unprecedented agility and scale, at the same time have control as well. So that's all about creating this balance. Now let's look at the cloud adoption framework governance model. We just talked about the corporate policies and the 5 disciplines of cloud governance in another slide. So the corporate policies around governance is a big intimidating topic. So people try to shy away from that a little bit because you don't know where to start. There has to be some tangible items that we need to do around governance. But basically, when we talk about governance, it seems like an abstract concept. And there are no, what is actually it means in terms of actual deployments, right? That's why we actually defined two levels here. The first part of it is called the policies, and then the second part of it is all about implementation of that. So the 5 disciplines are, as I mentioned before, cost management, security baseline, resource consistency, identity and access management, identity baseline, and deployment acceleration. So there obviously we need a cloud governance team, which actually comprises of people from different parts of the organization. Could be developers, designers, like architects, pretty much. And then we need IT management and all sorts of people who feed into this kind of process. So basically, we just need a body of people who actually run this for actually making this happen. Now, when we go into a cloud, there are built-in tools in Azure. So when you talk about Azure, one of the design philosophies of Microsoft Azure is that we actually always think that Azure is not the end state for everybody. Like, for example, there could be people who are actually having hybrid cloud. They may be having, we want to give choices to customers. Basically, we want people to maybe using their own premises environment for some of those things which they see value. And we also want to have Azure sometimes. And then you even, maybe they have other public clouds as well. So we don't want to have tools for each of those environments. So basically, one of the design philosophies that we always thrive on is that we wanted to have tools that actually are very hybrid. Hybrid means the same tools can be applied across different environments. Like, this is basically you have a single pane of glass that actually is provided to you, and then you manage everything. So we have lots of tools like that. So all our management tools are specifically catered for this kind of a scenario. So there are some of the tools that are coming native to Azure. They are called Azure Monitor, which is actually a process monitoring and notification and performance and all that kind of monitoring. And it has several parts to it, but it is an all-inclusive product that actually provides application and system monitoring, alerting and notification, and some sort of automation as well, right? Basically, what happens when CPU utilization is going up, whether you want to scale down or up, you can do automation as part of that as well. And then in the deployment acceleration, we have Azure blueprints and policies and several things that you could use. These are all coming out of the box. And, the blueprints actually creates, it's almost like a union of several things. Basically, a blueprint is defining policies, access controls, in some of the, starting and landing zone characteristics, some of the things that you want to stamp as a blueprint. So if you create a blueprint, every time you create a new subscription or anything that, or even a resource group, these blueprints can be applied across, and then you will have the starting landing zone, which actually has all the qualities of the blueprint that you defined. So some of these tools can be applied at multiple areas, and then these are some of the tools that I just want to introduce some of those tools for you. And again, when you are doing governance, we don't want to limit you to our own tools. You may be already using some of your third-party tools, so you always can bring them into cloud, and then you can use them to do your governance as well. For example, Splunk or HashiCorp has tools such as Terraform for automation, orchestration, and things like that, and ServiceNow for IT operations and things like that. So pretty much we actually also for deployment, you can use Chef or Puppet instead of using our Azure automation or ARM-based template, ARM templates for deployments or CLIs or PowerShell scripts. You could use our own tools, or you could bring your own tools as well. So now let's talk about the evolution, right? So when you are starting from scratch and going into cloud, you start with this, and as we mentioned in our roadmap, first we talk about strategy, planning, ready, and adopt phases, and then you define a small project that you go up front, and then you continuously improve on top of it. So you have multiple releases. It could be a single project or product, or multiple products that once the organization matures, you may have several projects going simultaneously. So always we actually improve on governance as well. So the philosophy here is that we are not improving the product, but we are also improving the process all the time. So basically, there is what I'm trying to say here is that we also have a release model for our governance. Basically, the new deployments call for new governances. Right? Sometimes you are using a new product, then we wanted a new feature in Azure. So you want to have more alignment of governance to that particular feature. So basically, it means that governance model is not a static model. It is actually very much a live model where we actually take these components of the deployment and design and then incorporate back into that. So that's what we talked about, the cloud governance body, who actually, there is a group of people actually gets all these feedback and continuously improve your governance model. So that's about the risk-driven evolution. Now let's say, the governance evolution that I actually talked about that. And so if you look at this diagram, we have some questions to your people here. So will the application criticality for this release impact policies? Like, we are just asking a question whether when I'm releasing this new application, whether it is going to have any impact on my policies, or does it need any amendment? So there's always a questionnaire around all that stuff. So what kind of data classifications are required and policies are changing? Is this a high risk data that we are deploying? Is personally identified information coming in, or is it going to affect any of those corporate compliance policies that we need to change? All these things will feed into your governance model. So that's basically the essence of that. So I think with that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation here, and there are a bunch of modules and resources that you could use. Just try to remember that URL ms.aka.ms adopt adopt. That's actually a good place to start. And there is a bunch of documentation, and whatever I mentioned today here is available in the websites. And there is also a learning module, Microsoft Learn, which is actually a good tool to start as well if you want to practice some of these. And there are a bunch of tools that we actually provide. There is a governance benchmark tool. So there is a question answer based tool that you can assess your current and desired state in your governance. So there are some tools that we provide, and as part of the governance model. So the governance model is just not a set of documentation, but it also comes with some tools for you to like assess and then plan your outcomes.